But I think what Sounil is really getting at is something really important. We need to stop thinking about controls as static things. This isn't an identified control. This is a capability my program has that may be called on to be exercised before, during, or after an incident has occurred. And the most important thing is having the capability. And we in this call have defined a capability as the combination of people, process, and technology to do a thing well. And so I think it's really bringing all of these things together. Like that talk track of like, stop thinking of identify controls as pre-boom things. There are tons of identify things you do during an incident response. And so you need to have that capability because you don't know when you're going to be called on to exercise that capability.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I actually try to divide up in the space as well, around this notion of situational awareness, which people are very familiar with, and situational awareness fits into the right of boom side of the equation. Then on the left of boom side, what we oftentimes struggle to get is structural awareness. I want to have a full understanding of what my assets are and how they relate to one another. Think about it from the context of like how you fight a fire. If I'm going to run into a building to fight a fire, I want to know blueprints. I want to know where hazardous materials are. I want to know, is the building built to code? Where are my critical assets? All those sort of things. That's all structural awareness, which is absolutely something that you call upon during an incident response and helps you put out that fire faster, right? And that's stuff that you absolutely would love to have, but unfortunately we don't have when Log4j breaks out, and you're like, where the heck, where is my structural awareness around where this particular asset is in my environment, how they're connected to everything else, and so on and so forth. But anyway, that sort of notion of just knowing what capabilities you have to be able to call upon and gather that structural awareness that you need to be able to eventually get to situational awareness of your
I love that, because like you could think of that situational awareness as Log4j of on a sheet of paper from a compliance perspective. The control is having software inventory, right? But the reality is when Log4j hits, you need to have a software inventory, but you also need to have the capability to go through and reinvestigate your software inventory. And so that situational awareness of that control of like, not only do I have an inventory, but I have to have the capability to update my inventory given new information. It's more of a process thing than a static outcome. And so like, I really like the way this conversation is going.
I wish we could have 2 hours of this, because I'd go to John right now, because I think one of the unique things that you're doing right, John, early on, and I'll come back to Gary because we will continue, but early on is asset mapping, right? Isn't that the first thing you guys do, John?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we do live network mapping for the exact reason Sounil said. So we have that infrastructure view of we understand what's out there. We understand if it's a popped printer trying to spread. I mean, if you're a professional bad guy, you're doing the same thing on your adversary's networks. That's actually one of the best times to target a bad guy when, if they logged into a VPN, there's no malware yet. I mean, there's a stat, Andrew, we pulled probably now 8 weeks ago, but as of 8 weeks ago in the last 12 months, 86% of our responses, bad guy in a network trying to spread, most time is all for mass ransom efforts, 86%. And this is no fault of these products, 0 alerts from AV or EDR. It's because so much of the initial observables look just like, clever sysadmin. And so by having this kind of network map, if you're a world-class practitioner in offense or defense, you really have to start with that. And if you're running an MSP, it's absolutely critical that you have a really good inventory. We've been on so many responses where we were finding domain controllers people didn't know existed. So that's why we love this framework, as a lens to just look through the world and make sense of it. It's very, very useful.
You just made Ryan Weeks' day about inventory.
Yeah.
All right, Gary, back to you. It was a good segue, though. Great talk. Great points. I'm really glad we went off on that. But Gary, back to you on.
And Sounil, Wes is being very complimentary of you now, but I've seen him speak many times. He gives no one any credit, including you. Just so you know. So your book's coming out. Maybe just and you're coming to Write a Boom. Can you give us like a little glimpse of what you'll be talking about at Write a Boom?
Yeah, sure. So, well, I guess first of all, I would just warn anybody who ever endeavors to write a book, count the cost and know that it's going to suck much of your energy and time. But anyway, that's it.
It sounds like software, Gary. You went through that very experience.
Exactly.
I think software is easier, frankly, but that's it. Book writing
Have you
is
ever owned a software company?
no, but maybe okay. I'll give that to you. It's not for the faint of heart either way,
There
right?
you go.
Anyway, so what my initial plan was in writing the book was to capture many of the use cases that I discovered. So the original use case was just mapping vendors. Tell me where this vendor goes. But along the way, I discovered all these other use cases as I struggled to make the model less wrong. Okay. And along the way, other practitioners had come and said, "Hey, here's an interesting use case that I discovered as well." Like for example, Adrian Sanabria, he said, you know what, I can find a way to map failed controls. Take any incident and tell me where I had a failed control, like Equifax, and that becomes a point of attention. Like let's make sure that those controls don't fail on us, right? So anyway, the book articulates a lot of these use cases, and I'll be sharing those use cases at the Write a Boom conference. One of them actually kind of I want to hit upon that I think Gary you mentioned was this notion that every customer comes in with a set of unique circumstances or unique environments. Well, as an MSP, how do you normalize that, right? And I'm sure it's a pretty hard challenge. Well, I've actually discovered, I think, a real interesting technique that does help normalize a profile for different parts of an organization. And could we perhaps share those profiles? Okay. The way I would describe it, and the way I describe it in the book is there's a set of business constraints that we have to operate in. If I have, for example, a sales and marketing team, if I have a developer team, if I have high-speed trading, each of those represents a set of business constraints that I have to operate against. If you have three different companies with each with a sales team, I would bet those constraints are largely the same. Okay. So could we actually share design patterns, security design patterns that works really well within those constraints, and share those design patterns for that particular business function?